for full
I do,
time?
yeah. Yeah, I'm the IT manager here at Masterclass.
Oh, wow. You're a busy guy.
A little bit, yeah. There's a couple of
Do-
tickets in the help desk queue right now.
Yeah, I bet that's your standard answer, I'm sure.
It certainly is.
All right, so I see us with about 20 minutes until we go live, or until we start to schedule thing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
What else do we have to check between now and then?
Shouldn't be much else, Molly. Is there anything on the your end that you want to look for?
Well, why don't we improve the quality of the simulation? Because I won't be talking to you during it. I'll be talking to Molly, right? So why don't we run it as realistically as possible, maybe with Molly, maybe with one of the students, and just make sure all the various links are working.
Perfect. Hi, Chris. So sorry about that. I've
Hi,
been
Molly.
setting up the live stream. It's such a pleasure to have you on today and to be speaking with you. So excited about today's session.
Great. You sitting in the same room as Brian?
Yes, I am. I'm literally across the table from him.
Okay, but you've got more of a spacey background than he does.
Exactly. That's why I'm on this side.
Great. And so how is it that we're going to link in each of the students? How will they show up?
So our students are currently actually very similar to the experience you just had with Brian. Their video is going to pop on. They'll then be able to introduce themselves, share where they're from, and then ask their question. So you'll be able to see them and then interact with them directly. They're currently set up as attendees. We promote them up to panelists, and that's when the video comes on.
Okay, and when do the attendees start seeing this? Are they seeing it already if they're logged in?
Yes, they're already on.
Great. Okay. Super.
Excellent.
And this is getting recorded for people to watch later. Is that right?
Correct.
Super. Yeah, it'd be fun. It was a lot of fun doing the whole masterclass project, and this is a nice adjunct to it. So I'm a professor at University of Waterloo, and then I work with the University of Toronto at the Rotman Business for the Creative Destruction Lab as well. So, and then I do a lot of teaching just directly with students of all ages, but this one's been a real treat. It's more than just teaching. It's more like almost like a legacy project. I was really glad to be asked to do it. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, it was an honor to have you on the site, and I immediately, when I found out that you were doing class, absolutely lost it. I was so excited. I remember watching some of your Facebook videos from when you were up in the station.
Where are you from, Molly?
I'm actually from New Hampshire originally.
Kitty corner across the country, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, a little closer. I grew up around the Great Lakes, so not too far away from New Hampshire.
Nice.
All right, so you're happy that when we swap to the first student here in whatever 15 minutes that everything's going to work right, and
correct,
volume checks and everything?
Yep. So we had a test run yesterday, introduced them to the platform, the format, ran through with everyone, made sure that everything would be all set for today.
Great. Sounds good. So do you need me for the next 10 minutes or no?
Nope. So you're free to, we can mute you and turn your video off. And then maybe 3 minutes before we go live at 1 o'clock, you can jump back on.
Great. So I'll be back in 15 minutes because I see it as 18 minutes or 17 minutes till.
Beautiful. Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll see you soon.
Okay. See you shortly.
Bye. Hi, Chris. You ready to get started?
I am ready. Are you ready, Molly?
I am ready. All right.
Great.
So it's going to take about 30 seconds before we're live on masterclass.com. So once I get a thumbs up from one of my coworkers here in the room, I'll start in with a quick intro and then we'll just get going.
Great. And how long are we going to talk?
So we have, let's see, we have about 15 questions or 17 questions for you. And if you need to jump out, please just let me know and we can stop whenever you need to.
Great. 17 questions. It'll probably take the better part of an hour, and sounds good to me. So
Perfect.
I got time. You got time? Let's
Great.
do it. It took a lot to set this up. Let's take advantage of it.
Excellent. All right. Just waiting to know that we're live. All right, so we are currently live. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Molly from the Masterclass team, joined by Chris Hadfield today. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us from your home in
Pleasure.
Canada. We're thrilled to get started, to ask you a couple questions, have our students ask you a couple questions, but if there's anything you'd like to say before we get started, please.
Sure. Thanks for organizing all this, Molly. And I know Brian, who's working behind the scenes to make things happen. I've been pursuing things that were important to me my whole life, but you get to a certain stage where you've accomplished some of them, and then you ask, what do you do now? And the ability and the opportunity to share them so that other people can hopefully learn from them and do things that I never had a chance to do. To me, that's a wonderful adjunct and follow on to the important activities that I've tried to do. And so when I got asked to do a master class, it was just a real treat. It's not just a class on space exploration, but it ends up being, at this particular stage of life, a sort of a summary of everything that's important to me and why I've done it and where I hope it leads in the future. Sort of almost like a legacy project. And so to me, it was a real privilege to be able to do this masterclass. I'm really pleased with the number of students that have signed up all around the world for the class. And I'm really looking forward to having a chance to talk directly with some of them today. So thanks for setting it up.
Of course. So we are going to start off with a couple of questions from students who weren't actually able to make it today, but still would love to get your thoughts. So from Michael, do you ever feel a sense of panic when you were finally out in space and tethered to the ship? Personally, I have a fear of open waters here on Earth. I can't imagine what it must be like in space.
A fear of open waters. That's interesting. Why is Michael afraid of open waters? That would be my fundamental question. Because you're always open somewhere, right? You're open land or open mud or whatever. Why is suddenly open water cause him to panic? And it's the question that if I were Michael, I would ask myself, what is it about the open water that makes me feel nervous and to the point where panic takes over, where you can't even be rational anymore? And nobody wants a panicked astronaut. That's when you climb on an airliner and if the door is still open looking through the two pilots, what you're hoping is, if you glance forward and look at those two pilots, that neither of them are panicked. You're hoping that they have learned everything they might need to do so that no matter what goes right or goes wrong with the airplane, it's something they know how to do. Space flight is sort of everything all at once in a very hazardous environment. It's not just open water, but it's open sky, it's complex machinery, it's huge explosions happening in order to get you there. It's a tiny little aluminum bubble of air that is keeping you alive in the endless vacuum of space. So there's lots of things to panic about, I guess. The real question is, are you those two airline pilots who have learned what they need to know so that they have something to rely on besides panic? And whenever I feel the first twinges of nervousness or fear, that's when I kind of look and go, why? Why is this making me feel nervous? That sort of rumbly feeling in your stomach, and the sweaty palms, and the standard indications to yourself. And to me, it's just a strong like a symbolic reaction of your body that you aren't ready for what's about to happen. And maybe in Michael's case, he's not ready to be in the water out of sight of land. So I think the important thing then is to, what is the actual danger? And how can you deal with the actual danger? And one way is just never get on the water out of sight of land. And he has that choice. But if you ever want to fly around the world, you're going to cross an ocean. If you ever want to cross a river, you can limit your whole life based on your own fears. But if you have a ship that has a very small probability of sinking, or an airliner that has a very small probability of crashing into the water, and even if the ship does sink, if you have lifeboats, and the lifeboats, Michael should go look at the lifeboats and learn about them and understand how the engines work, and where is the emergency equipment, and how much food is in them, and where are the, all the life jackets that you need in a hurry, and actually dig into it. Then maybe he would have something going than just panic. And I think it's natural to be panicked. We are not designed to be out in the open ocean, out of sight of land. That's not, we don't have fins and gills, and we're not whales. But our technology allows us to go places and thrive that we're not naturally evolved for. And what it takes is your own change of your fundamental instinctive reactions. Don't just rely on whatever it is, 300,000 years of instinct, however long Homo sapiens have been around, but recognize that there can be safety measures and rational things that are protecting you, so that you do not need to be just panicked. And that's the way I treated everything in spaceflight, including, as Michael says, being out on a spacewalk tethered to the ship. It's dangerous, but it's magnificent. And you can lead a life, a very small, very safe life, or maybe there's some things that really intrigue you and you want to have magnificence in your life, and you're probably going to have to accept that there's risk involved with seeking things that are important and things that strike you as amazing and magnificent. And so then I think your job should just change, and you should turn yourself into someone who has more going for him or going for her than just panic and instinct. Change your instinctive reactions, learn the details, and open up the whole oceans of the world, or whatever it is that's the current boundaries of your life.
Thank you, Chris. I think he's really going to enjoy that. And then we have another question from a student whose name is Samir, and he wasn't actually able to participate in the session today because he's actually in flight school with the Navy, and his flight actually coincided with our session today. But he'd like to know, during training, you are constantly asked to master new material in a short period of time. What is the key to retaining all of this information while also not burning yourself out?
Yeah, there's no way you can retain everything that you're taught. There's no way. And especially the rate of invention in the world is currently accelerating. Our understanding of the universe around us is not just increasing, but it's accelerating. So there's no way you could keep up with everything. It's just overwhelming. So I think you need to then decide what is important to me, and then see how much time you have to learn it, and then start holistically. Like if I wanted to learn about, I don't know, I want to learn, how does a Tyrannosaurus Rex hear? Well, that's an intriguing question. And if I had 5 minutes, then I would just get on Wikipedia and look and get a picture of, its tympanic membrane or whatever the Tyrannosaurus had, and try and get a quick little bit of information and stuff it into my head. But if I had a day, then I would start with, how does anybody hear? how does hearing happen? Let's start holistically. Let's start with the big picture. Try and understand the overall idea, and then look at the way different beings hear. I know how my ears work, but I don't really know how, I don't know, a hummingbird hears or a bumblebee. Do they hear, or do fish hear? I don't know. And I would take time and just try and get a big picture feeling. And I find learning to me is like a funnel. And you want to start as far up the funnel as you can with as much general info, time permitting. And then, but you need to continue to narrow down what is actually important to you. And for Samir in flight school, needs to really focus, of course, on operating the airplane or aircraft that he's flying today. But there's a lot of information about the weather, meteorology, navigation, airplane systems. And for me, try and always start with the big picture and then getting closer and closer to what parts of it am I going to interact with? What parts of it are going to be right there in front of me? Once I've got the big picture, then actually get in the cockpit of the airplane or the spaceship, or get in the laboratory, or get into the car, whatever it is you're trying to learn, and see what is there in front of you, and try and link all of that background information to the cues that you have while you're using it. So that when you look at the switch that says whatever, hydraulic systems, or if you look at a diagram of someone's sketch of a Tyrannosaurus, and on the side of the head, they've just put a little hole, then you can go, okay, I just see that one little switch, but it reminds me of all those other things that I learned. And that thing that is your entryway back up the funnel is your reminder of the, and it becomes a memory aid for me. And in the class, when I talked about a one pager, the one pager was all the stuff sort of that was relevant out of that funnel that would spit out of the narrow little spigot at the end. And I'd try and get that onto one page, and I would review that. And so then when I sat in the cockpit or was trying to speak Russian or whatever it is I'm trying to do, then whatever I have in front of me is the reminder to go back up into the more expansive amount of the knowledge. And that's how I keep from burning myself out. I don't try and remember everything. I try and get it as simplified and concise as I can. And then when it's there in front of me, then it'll remind me back. But also, you got to keep at it. I'm learning to fly a new airplane next week, and I'm in the books. And I've been flying another airplane for the last month to get myself ready, to get myself in the game. And now I need to dig into the books on this new airplane and really understand it. And then, you know, I never try and rest on my laurels of things I've already know, especially if the stakes are high or it's something I really want to understand. But I'm actually now really interested. How does a Tyrannosaurus Rex hear? I'm going to go look it up when we're done.
Excellent. If you do, would love to see the one pager on that.
Hopefully less than one page.
Fair. Quarter page. Next up, we're actually going to start pulling in our students for today, and we're going to start off with Judith.
Great. So I guess I'm going to see Judith here shortly. Judith,
yes, I'm
hopefully
here.
You can see me. I hear you, Judith. I don't see you.
Oh,
now I see you, Judith. Hello, how are you?
hi. Hi, I'm from Taipei, Taiwan. And my question for you is...
Just a sec. Are you in Taipei right now?
Yes.
Wow. Thank you for, it's the wrong time of day in Taipei. Thanks for joining in today.
No, not the wrong time when you get to talk to Chris Hadfield.
Oh, that's a lovely answer. And my son used to live in Taipei, and my daughter-in-law is from mainland China, and my granddaughter has been running around with us this summer. So I have a great affinity for the part of the world that you're from. And thanks for joining in today. So what's your question, Judith?
Yes. My question is, so you've mentioned about dealing with fear by being very prepared, by learning and practicing so much that the uncertainty and the unknowns that induce fear are essentially eliminated.
Right.
And so, but what about anger? Would you happen to have any tips on that front?
Do you mean my anger or other people's anger, or both?
Both.
Yeah. And I sure don't profess to be perfect on anything, but here's what I think about it. Anger to me is someone feeling frustrated that something that's important to them is not being communicated or is not getting done. I think that's why people feel anger. Something that's really important to me is not happening or is not being understood or is not being respected. I think that is at the root cause of anger normally. And so if you are feeling it within yourself, that's probably easier to deal with. Try and analyze, why is this making me angry? Why? It's just one of the emotions. You could feel any of the emotions, but why is this thing? Why am I frustrated? Why is the gorge coming up? Why do I see red? Why is this making me angry? And personally, I count to 10. Here's a really funny thing. Someone pointed out to me. They said, if you run into, hey, am I allowed to swear in this? It's not really a swear word. If you run into one asshole in the morning, then that's okay, and you can forgive that person. But if you run into assholes all day, you're probably the asshole. And so I think that's one of the reminders I have for myself, is if I notice that I've had sort of a not a good interaction with several people in a row, then I'm the problem. The rest of the world didn't suddenly change. And so I realized, I am letting my anger, and maybe I'm tired, maybe my day's not going the way I wanted. I try and be reflective and self-analytic. And if I'm noticing that there's a recurring problem happening during a day with multiple people, then I'm the recurring problem, and I need to give myself a timeout. I need to get away, relax, take a 15-minute nap, count to 10 before I talk, recognize that there are other ways of dealing with things than just my own emotional anger. I think it's easier to deal with your own than other people's. So if someone else is angry, then I look at them and I think they are frustrated, or they are not able to communicate something that's important to them, or something's not happening that is really important to them. And so maybe you can diffuse their anger just by diffusing it, by just answering the thing that they're dissatisfied about. Try and actually respond to the whatever it is that's bothering them. It might be really simple. But you have to listen. And I think the first step in trying to deal with an angry person is to be intuitive and try and actually listen, maybe even not to what they're saying, but the meaning behind what they're saying. What is it that's making them angry? And then, there's probably going to be a short term and a long term. In the short term, you're just going to have to deal with an angry person. You need to defuse it. You need to give them a distraction. You need to answer whatever part of their frustration is possible and reasonable. And it may not be reasonable to you, but you're not the one that's angry. So there's some middle ground. If you can give some ground on what they're angry about so that you can talk them down to a level where maybe they'll start being reasonable, then that's probably a worthwhile thing to do. But then afterwards, I think, unless it's a one-time encounter with someone, but if it's someone that you're going to have to work with more than once, then I think the afterwards is really important. When things have settled down, that's the time to open up communication and say, I noticed this really was difficult for us to deal with together. This really made you angry. How can we deal with it differently next time? What were the early signs that I missed? Where did I miss what was important to you? How can I try and not get to the point where it's getting your blood pressure up? And so I always try and avoid situations where people are just functioning on raw emotion, try and head them off at the pass, try and give people some other way. And it involves listening, it involves hearing, and listening and hearing are different things. It's easy to listen, but to actually hear what somebody's saying or trying to say, that takes a more concentrated effort, and I'm not perfect at it. But then changing how you've been behaving, or changing how the two of you act together so that it diffuses the anger. And I have lots of examples in my life, personal ones, my wife and I have been together over 40 years, and things that make her angry and things that make me angry are different. But we've learned how to deal with each other over those years, people at work, and then of course, strangers as well. So that's how I try and look at it, as there's something this person holds really dear that's important to them that they are not getting respected and responded to, and try and be part of the solution to their anger, not just adding logs to the fire.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your insomnia.
No problem.
Nice to talk with you.
Nice talk with you.
And next up, we have Felipe.
Felipe, hi. I assume you're just getting branched in right now.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing that we can even do this all around the world. Felipe, I think I hear your voice, and pretty soon, unless you're a dead ringer for Molly, I think I'm going to see your face here very shortly. Oh, Felipe, I see you.
All right.
Cool. I got.
So
can you see me all right?
Great. Yeah, sure. It's great to be talking to you, Chris. I'm Felipe
Great.
Sanchez. I'm from São Paulo in Brazil. And
Wow.
my question to you is, I have the impression that in science fiction, the way that spaceships are represented is heavily inspired on the early computers of the 60s and maybe 70s, such as this one. So this is a miniature replica of one of the first computers designed in Brazil, and this was manufactured in the University of São Paulo in 1972. So there's lots of lights. Even though this is off right now, it would be blinking a lot during normal operation, and also lots of toggle switches and buttons. So this is the kind of early computers I'm talking about. And I have the impression that in science fiction, that was a major influence to how spaceships are depicted, represented. So my question is, how scarce or abundant are the flashing lights on actual modern spaceships nowadays, like the ISS? And also, if there's any further insight you would like to share with us regarding control panels of spaceships and their design in general.
Sure, thanks, Felipe. And I haven't been to Sao Paulo yet. I took lots of pictures of it from orbit, but I would love to get to that part of the world. I haven't. I used to live in Venezuela, but that's as close as I've been. So, but thanks for the question. So in aerospace vehicle design, spaceship design, form follows function. We really need things to be functional. And when spaceships were first built, back when you're talking, it was almost entirely analog. Analog meaning you had a physical interaction with a system. You would have a gauge that showed you a pressure, and you'd have a switch that would affect that pressure. And when you threw the switch, some electromechanical thing happened with a solenoid or something that then would actually cause a physical reaction somewhere in your ship. And for early aircraft and early spaceships, that's what the technology was. But we have transitioned from analog to digital, very, very much so over the last generation or two. And spaceships have followed the trend. I flew the space shuttle a couple times. It had 500 switches and circuit breakers in the cockpit, 500. And all of them were directly connected to some important system. And not only are the switches connected, but they have to be switches then that are safe to kick, because you're floating around weightless. And it's easy to lose awareness of where your toes are, and you're going to kick them. And if that's a switch that, I don't know, does something critical, then of course you have to have protected switches. And if it's a standard sort of fuse, you have to think about what is driven by gravity. You know, a little fuse, often the idea is that when it gets too hot, the little circuit breaker or whatever, it'll melt. And because it melts, gravity pushes the liquefied metal down and it breaks the electrical circuit, and everybody's safe. But if there's no gravity, even something as simple as the design of a fuse needs to be rethought. So we've really tried to take advantage of digitization. And also switches and fuses and servos are heavy. And instead, if you can somehow make all of your interfaces off of one screen, if you can digitize, then you can save a lot of weight and a lot of volume inside your ship. So the shuttle evolved over its 40-year history from very analog to much more digital, but it still had, 100 blinking lights and things like that panel that the University of Sao Paulo that you just held up, a lot of stuff like that. A lot of the switches, they look like a computer logic tree more than they did any sort of nice human interface. But now we could do differently. And even in the Soyuz, which was the Russian ship I flew on my third flight, it's got some analog switches, but in the middle, it's got a computer display, and they try and make it as human factors friendly as possible. And we try and reserve the blinking lights and the loud noises, the things that get your attention, for the stuff that is really important, really time critical. you know, on the Starship Enterprise, when there was a red alert, there was that, the red light would flash and there'd be a whoop, 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 and all that noise. That happens on the International Space Station, exactly the same. When we have a fire or an ammonia leak or a depressurization, then there are lights that flash and there are certain horns and alarms that go because it's critical. And you need to be able to go to some mechanical interface and change the situation quickly. You can't have a digital fire extinguisher. You know, it's going to be analog. And so you're going to have a mix of the two. But almost everything on the space station is controlled from a laptop or a digital interface panel. Very few are like the panel you held up or like the space shuttle was. The Soyuz is a mix because it's an evolving vehicle. And there's some things that you still want to be analog because computers lock up. And if your computer locks up, you don't want to instantaneously die. And that thing rides on a rocket, it comes down through the atmosphere. So you need some switches that will allow you to fly the Soyuz, even if your computers lock up. Same thing on the space shuttle. It had 5 computers running in parallel, little tiny memory computers, but an early version of digitization. But if they all started hanging up, if the 4 of them started all taking off in different directions or disagreeing, then the pilot and the commander both had a big red button to push on the top of their control stick. And that would engage the 5th computer that had a really primitive control program called the backup flight system. And that would hopefully allow you to at least safely land or get to where you needed to go next. And the Soyuz is sort of like that. So to answer your question, maybe if you look at the new Boeing or the new SpaceX spaceships, the Starliner or the Crew Dragon, they have almost entirely glass cockpits. And we do it because it saves weight. It can be more intuitive to look at. You can have multiple layers of screens. It can tell you more clearly what's going on. You can use the power of computers and help from various layers of artificial intelligence to not just have to rely on your ability to remember what switch did what. So yeah, I think maybe at some point the present will catch up with the future and it'll look like we've always dreamed it would look.
But it seems that they have physical buttons on the Crew Dragon, right? For the really critical things.
You always want to have critical buttons. It's like in your car. You know, there are some things you want to direct control over, but you can put the air controls, the air conditioning system, the windows, you can make all those off of one flat screen. But you probably want a steering wheel if you're going to be controlling it. You want a brake pedal. You want an accelerator pedal because there are some things that you need in a hurry. An emergency brake, you know, same thing on a spaceship. You need some things that are pure analog, pure human interface. I think it'll always be a little a mix between the two, but trending more and more towards digital.
Sure. Thanks for your question. Your answer. Sorry.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the question, Felipe.
Yeah, sure.
All right. And next up, we actually have Dennis.
Great.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can, Dennis. I can see you as well. Nice to be
good.
chatting
Okay.
with you.
So my name is Dennis Comfort. I'm from Seattle, Washington. And
Nice.
I was curious. I really enjoy your masterclass seminar. I thought it was really great. You did that, and it's been fun to watch. So
Thanks.
I get that lower stages of rockets can propel themselves through the atmosphere with the thrust against the air. But I'm wondering, when space is a vacuum, what's the rocket pushing against for momentum when there's no air? And the other thing, again, thanks for doing this. I got to work on the first space shuttle, which was really fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I wrote software it actually tracked the tile design during construction. So that was kind of fun. And then
I counted on those tiles with my life. So thanks for your work.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
And then I watched flight since Alan Shepard took off. So I really love space flight. But hey, thanks for doing this. But kind of curious about how this all works.
So it's a great question, Dennis. People think you're pushing against the air. So when you get out in the vacuum, the emptiness of space, what do the rockets push against? It's just sort of a non-intuitive thing. Here's an experiment you can try there in Seattle, maybe. I don't know if you go out in a canoe or a kayak.
Yeah.
But next time you're one of those boats that's really sort of slippery or in the water, or if you're an ice skater, go stand on the ice and take something heavy in your hands. Let's say a cement block. whether you're sitting in a kayak or a canoe or standing on the ice. And if you stand there with that cement block and you push the block away from yourself, you will go the other way. And it's not the air resistance that is making you go the other way. It's because you are moving a heavy mass this way, and force equals mass times acceleration, the basic fundamental physical theories. And if you are moving a mass that way, then there's got to be an equal and opposite force imparted on you this way. And so what will happen if you're standing on the ice, if you throw that block, you'll start gliding the other way. Or in a canoe, if you throw it one way, the canoe will start to drift the other way. And it's just force and mass causing an acceleration. Or you can, move those terms around depending on whether you're the block or the canoe or whatever. So the fuel coming out of the rocket engine is the same as that cement block. The engines don't push on the air. The engines are just taking a million tiny little things. You could visualize them as a million little cement blocks and throwing them out the back of the ship. And that makes the ship go the other way. Okay. Exactly the same as if you threw a cement block in a canoe. And so what you want to do to get more thrust is either to get more fuel pouring out the back or to make the stuff coming out the back go faster. Either way, you will have accelerated more mass out one way, which will push your mass the direction that you want to go. Then you just have to be able to steer it. And so it doesn't matter if whatever it is that's downstream of all those things that are pouring out the back, if you threw that block and it hit a wall, or if you threw that block and it just landed in the water, or if it shattered on the ice, it doesn't matter where the block goes. What matters is that you accelerated it, and that gave you a force the opposite direction.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Makes sense?
Yep.
Great. Nice to chat with you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Morgan.
Hello.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Hi. I'm Morgan Seberg, and I live in New York City. So I'm a 15-year-old student, and I go to a pretty competitive high school. I've had hopes and dreams of becoming an astronaut since very, very young. And I think that I have the drive, and I'll do whatever it takes to make that dream a reality. So my question is, what can I do to shape my career around becoming an astronaut? I see many ordinary jobs have specific paths around taking a certain class in college, but being an astronaut seems to have no obvious path. So what do I do?
Good question, Morgan. Thanks for asking. And congratulations on going to a school like that. That takes a lot of extra work. It'll set you up on a different path for life. So it's worth all the extra work, I think. So there are three obvious big things, Morgan. Number one is if you're going to be an astronaut, then by definition, you're flying in space. You have long ways away from Earth. That means you're a long ways away from a hospital and ambulance and any sort of medical care. So you're going to have a healthy body if you want to be trusted to go away from the Earth. They're not going to take you up there if you haven't taken care of your body and you constantly need medical care. Some of that you can deal with. Some of it is just however you're born. We're all born imperfect, but hopefully the body that the fates gave you was good enough to be able to allow you to pass the various medicals. And the medicals are getting easier over time too. But take care of your body. Exercise, eat reasonably, try and end up every day a little bit stronger and a little bit more fit than you started it. It doesn't take much, but it does take something. The second is flying spaceships is complicated. It's always going to be complicated. If you just want to be a passenger in the back, if you just want to get on whatever airline there at LaGuardia and fly to LA, you need to have almost zero skills, right? You can just pay your ticket, sit in the back, someone will show you where the exits are, and you just sit there and eat your snack and your peanuts and go to LA. But if you actually want to fly an airliner, then you need skills. You're going to have to study and learn. And an astronaut is a far more complicated job than an airline pilot. And so you're going to have to learn how to learn things. And it sounds like that's what you're doing at the elite high school in New York there right now. Not just learn things, but learn how to learn things. What are the systematic ways by which you learn something complicated? And if someone's saying, hey, we need someone to walk on the moon, we need someone to fly a lunar lander, they're going to look around for someone who has proven their ability to learn complicated stuff. So plan on, I'm sure you're thinking of it, but plan on getting education your whole life. As far as you can take it, keep on studying. Plan on, advanced university degrees in some area that's interesting to you. And then the third thing is, after you've got as healthy a body as you could muster, and you've proven your ability to learn complex stuff, and that is make decisions and stick with them. Learn to function in a world where your decisions have consequence. When you fly a spaceship, the wrong decision kills everybody. And so we want to hire people, and same thing flying an airliner. You want to hire people who have a proven ability to make good decisions when the consequences matter. And you can start doing that right now. How old are you, Morgan?
15.
15. So you could already be a scuba diver. You could already be learning to fly an airplane. You could be doing whatever is sort of interesting to you, but things that have a complexity, but also a level of danger. And maybe you're doing some of that stuff, but you could start doing it now. But think about what career you're going to go into that isn't just theoretical, but also is operational. And the definition of operational is where your decisions are irreversible and have consequence. And so once you've got those three things, and then at least you've turned yourself into someone who's more eligible. I would always pursue things that are interesting to you. Don't go chasing off something just because you think someday it'll give you a qualification that someone else will like. There's all kinds of things you can do and still get those three things I talked about. The key is to become technically really competent and also to learn how to make decisions and stick with them. The last thing, Morgan, is never count on something in the future happening in order to make yourself happy. High school can be a great time. There's all sorts of fun stuff. There's all sorts of frustrating stuff, just like every other phase of life, but there's all sorts of cool stuff going on. There's clubs at your school. There's things you can be doing. There's stuff, the sun is shining on you in New York right now. It's a nice evening. There's all kinds of cool stuff you could be doing right now. And you sort of have a deliberate choice of loving your life or disliking what's happening. And I try and deliberately notice the cool stuff that's going on around me and liking it on a regular basis, because I never counted on being an astronaut. It was just something that helped me choose what to do next. As far as careers, do what's important to you, become as technically competent as you can, be ready to change direction, always be finding out what's going on in the astronaut program, and keep applying. Look at what Boeing is they're going to, on their new spaceship, they're going to fly a non-NASA astronaut, a guy named Chris Ferguson, on one of the early flights of the Boeing spaceship. That's new. Non-NASA astronauts flying in the United States. So it's going to evolve. There's going to be lots of opportunity, but continue to give yourself all of those skills. Look at what other astronauts do. Think about what skills you need to have, and always be working to change yourself into somebody like that. And even if you don't walk on the moon, you're going to do a lot of cool stuff in your life, and you're going to like a lot of it. So to me, that's what I recommend.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. Good luck to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And next up, we have Jack.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, Jack, and you're in a very dark room. Where are you today?
Yeah, I'm actually in Brisbane, Australia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. They're on the Gold Coast somewhere. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a bit early. This is fun though.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being up in the middle of the night, Jack. What's your question, sir?
That's all good. So my question is, I really enjoyed the episode where you talked about emergency procedures and boiling everything down to one page, because you only have one breath to deal things. So
yeah.
My question is, what was the most challenging emergency situation you trained for? And then compare that to the most challenging emergency situation that you've actually encountered in spaceflight.
Yeah, I trained as an astronaut for 21 years. So I trained for a lot of different, very critical emergencies. When you're on board a space station, as you say, in one breath, your main external cooling system is liquid ammonia. And it runs through, so it's creating the cold that's keeping you cool inside. So that means somehow the cold is being transferred to the environment inside. So there's a heat transfer device. But that means on one side of the heat transfer device, there's liquid ammonia. And on the other side is you. If that liquid ammonia breaks through your heat transfer device, that's what'll kill you in one breath. So that's one of the serious things we train for, is if the atmospheric contamination light goes on, and if the pressures are dropping in the liquid ammonia system, you hear this alarm. There are a certain combination of lights that come up, and you have to get onto a mask before you inhale any of that ammonia. And so that's one breath away from death. That's a pretty serious one. When you're flying a spaceship, especially the space shuttle, there are thousands of things that are instantaneous, very serious. And a lot of them, say for example, you launch off the pad and you get to 1,000 feet and you hit a seagull and it breaks your windscreen. Now you're on a rocket ship going up with a broken windscreen. So there's no way that your space shuttle is going to be able to hold air pressure. So you sure can't go into space. So you have to abort your launch and do this crazy thing called a return to launch site abort, where you jettison the big solid rockets, jettison off, but then you use your fuel to actually fly away from Florida and then turn around and fly backwards through your own flame until it starts driving you back towards Florida, and until you start falling into the atmosphere. And then hopefully you can fly that shuttle down and land it. But probably you're going to have to fly the shuttle down until you get down to 30,000 feet, get it stable, and then one by one, blow the hatch and jump out the side of the space shuttle and come floating down in a parachute. That's a pretty serious emergency that we train for regularly. But what actually happened in comparison, fortunately, my spaceships behaved themselves. The most serious thing we had was our liquid ammonia system suddenly did spring a leak, but it wasn't inside. It was outside. It wasn't spraying ammonia into the bubble of air where we were living. It was spraying it out to space. So it was serious, because without liquid ammonia, the space station will overheat and become uninhabitable. And so we had to do an emergency spacewalk and deal with spewing ammonia and do a repair that we weren't expecting to do. But we had prepared for it and trained for it in amongst all those more dire emergencies. And as a result, we got it fixed, and the station is still up there here 5 years on. So luckily, touch wood, that was the worst one I ever had to deal with as an astronaut. And we work really hard to train much more rigorously and completely than the real life is going to deal us. And that way you're not nervous, because heck, I've flown this thing in the simulator backwards through the flame and managed to land it and bail out the side. Things are going to go better than that today. I'm ready. And it gives you confidence. So yeah, we train for some pretty dire things, but we also work really hard to make sure our ships are healthy and do their job well. Just like the two guys who did a spacewalk yesterday. That's a dangerous thing to do, but they had a really good, successful spacewalk as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that ammonia leak, would it be dangerous to get it on the outside of the spacesuit? Like, how did you handle that in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we asked the question, and we asked the question, and the NASA engineers and medical people asked the question. I mean, there is ammonia in every breath you take, but a tiny bit. And so your body can deal with it. But at a certain level, it starts becoming hazardous to your health. So first, you have to know how much ammonia can you take, and then how do you purify it out of the environment. And if you're outside fixing an ammonia leak and you get sprayed with ammonia, how do you ever make your suit clean enough to come back inside? So we have ammonia detectors, so we can see how much ammonia is on us. And one of the beauties of being outside in the vacuum of space is if you turn towards the sun, you're in the complete empty vacuum of space, and the ammonia, even if it's a solid, will sublimate or boil off into space slowly. So as long as you can expose all of that ammonia that is frozen or stuck to you to the sun, then it will sublimate off. And there may be a tiny trace amount on you, but it'll be low enough that it can be diluted with the atmosphere of the space station and won't contaminate it too badly. We could get in the airlock and we could flush the airlock a few times too, fill it up with fresh air, blow that air out to space, do that a few times. And yeah, it's one of the things we deal with, and so far so good.
Awesome. No, thanks for that, Chris.
Pleasure. Thanks for
meeting
staying
you.
up.
Oh,
Nice
good.
to meet you as well. Thanks.
And next up, we have Prakash.
Hi, Chris. Could you hear me?
I have you loud and clear. I see you as well now, Prakash. Where are you today?
Hi, Chris. I'm from Sydney, Australia.
Oh, nice. So yeah, I was in Sydney not too long ago. Happy to be speaking with you, and thank you also for being up at the wrong time of day.
It's okay, no worries. Thank you very much for doing this. Yeah, so you spoke about the one pager before with Samir's question. Just like a bit more detail on that. So as you mentioned in your masterclass, the one pager is just the tip of the iceberg. So how do you go about learning all that theory that lies beneath the surface? So basically, I'm trying to understand like the process of creating the one pager. Do you is your memory good enough that you can just read a textbook one time and then create the one pager, or do you have multiple notes and then you boil it down to a one pager?
Yeah, I wish I could. I wish I had my let's say my Soyuz notes with me. I studied the Soyuz for, well, in reality, for 20 years. You know, I first had to learn to speak Russian, and then I started studying Soyuz in Russian. And it's like an encyclopedia of information, multiple volumes, huge depth of information. But what I would do as I'm reading a page and I'd go through this and go, oh, that's an important thing. And then I'd start keeping my own notes of things that I recognize were important. And then so I end up with binders full of information about the Soyuz. And so maybe, 40 pages, 50 pages of information about, I don't know, the Soyuz communication system. And now that I've got 40 pages, I can't remember 40 pages of notes, at least not when I need it. So now I start going through and trying to simplify it and summarize it and make it more compact. And maybe I don't need to write out the whole name of something. Maybe I can just call it by the name that I've learned. And one of the beauties of studying and then simulating is you start to recognize, oh, that didn't turn out to be important at all. That was a piece of interesting information, but I don't actually need to know that. If I'm dealing with a communication system, do I need to know the resistance of a diode in it? No, it's interesting, but it's irrelevant. So after a while, when you're learning a complicated system, you can start to learn of what you don't actually have to remember. You might have learned it, but you don't have to remember it. It's not going to affect how you operate this thing. Same thing if you're studying a language. You can learn every rule of grammar that exists, but what matters is, can you actually communicate? And some of those rules of grammar, if you looked them up, you'd remember, or some of the more esoteric spellings. But what you really need to focus on is, what do I need to know to get done what it is I'm trying to do? And how can I simplify this encyclopedia of information, getting a smaller and smaller summary cheat sheet, so that when I'm getting ready to do this thing, like if I was going to do an interview in Russian, I could get out, I kept a Russian cheat sheet for myself of all of the terminology, of the areas I had trouble remembering, of various things. And I would sit down and read it for a half hour before the interview. So all that stuff was fresh in my mind. Same thing for the Soyuz communication system. The night before the sim or before flight, I would review it. And on orbit, I would do the same thing. And you constantly refine it. I'm learning to fly an airplane right now, a Cessna 170 that was built in 1953. And I did the same thing. I went into the history of the airplane. I studied how it was built. What's the difference between a 170A and a 170B? How does this 6-cylinder engine work? How do the systems work? And then I went to the National Transportation Safety Board and I looked, what are all of the accidents that have ever happened with a Cessna 170B? And how does this airplane kill people? What are the things? Because then you can realize, oh, I don't really need to know what type of aluminum the skin is made of. Who cares? That doesn't matter. But what matters is that occasionally this little cotter pin comes out, and if I don't check it before flight, then this airplane may try and kill me today. And I have got it all down now to 1 page for that airplane. And even though it's a simple single engine airplane with just a few seats and you know, I still read that entire thing before every flight because it takes all of that encyclopedia of information and gets it in the front of my mind. And every time I fly it, I learn something new and I go back and I modify my 1 pager. And it's always getting better and better. And that's how I learn complicated systems. And if I were to fly a space shuttle now, I'd have to go way beyond my 1 pagers because it's been 16 years, 17 years since I flew a space shuttle. So I would have to go way back up the funnel into the encyclopedia to remind myself of what this 1 sentence on my 1 pager actually meant. Because 15 years ago, I knew what it meant, but I've thought of a lot of things since then. And I would need to constantly go up and down. And you never know as much as you want. You just need to know as much as you have to in order to do what it is you're trying to do. And that, to me, that's how I view all learning.
Thank you very much. That was great. Yes, it does. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Great, Prakash. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
You too.
I have to know, is it a Cessna tail dragger?
Yeah, the 170 is the tail dragger. They modified it. The 172 that everybody flies is they put a nose wheel on it, so it drives a little more intuitively. But the beauty of a tail dragger is you can land on a less prepared surface. You can land in a field, so it's actually safer. It's a little more complicated to fly, but a safer airplane.
My dad has one and flies off of a grass runway. Sorry,
nice.
I completely derailed us. Next up, we have Chris.
Hey, Chris,
Hi,
how you doing? Where are you today?
Cape Canaveral, Florida.
Oh, you're in Canaveral. Cool.
Yeah. I have seen the images of Earth from ISS, but I've never seen our images out to space. Are there windows that look out into space? And could you see more stars if there were? I've always wondered if the glow of the Earth or the sun would make it difficult.
It's an interesting question, Chris. There are windows that face away from the Earth. Not too many. The Earth is the hard thing to see from down here on the surface. I mean, if you asked an ant, or I have a pug named Albert, if you ask Albert or an ant what they know about the world, they're so close to the surface of the world that they can hardly see the world at all. But when you get 300 miles out, suddenly your whole perspective is wildly different. And so you see the Earth with a clarity and a perspective that we've never had before. And so therefore, that's where we put our best windows, because that's the thing that's radically different. Facing space is still almost exactly the same distance away. And, you know, the Earth's sun is 93 million miles away. We've only gone 300 miles. So it's, you know, it's still the same distance, basically. And the stars is even more exaggerated. So what you're really asking me is it dark enough to be able to, or does the atmosphere distort the view enough, even in the night, that that it's better viewing of the heavens from a spaceship? And obviously it is. It's a little better. That's why we put the Hubble telescope up there and all the other ones, because they don't get the atmosphere in the way. But for the human eye, if you were to, I mean, at Cape Canaveral, it's pretty light. But if you just get north, if you go up to one of those beaches up north of Kennedy and Cape Canaveral, and you go out there on a really dark night and you're away from all the lights on one of those beautiful, clear, maybe a winter's night where there's not too much humidity in the way, you can see the Milky Way like crazy. I mean, but what you have to do is be outside long enough to let the rods and cones in your eyes fully night adapt. And it takes like, I don't know, 15 minutes. But once your eyes are night adapted, then they pick up all the little traces of light that otherwise would be invisible to you. I mean, though the sky's still there during the day, it's just the light's so bright that your eyeballs shrink down and you can't see them. The trouble with a spaceship is, like a space station, you're going around the world every 90 minutes. So you're only in the darkness maximum for 40, 45 minutes or 46 minutes. But really there's a sunset and a sunrise period. You're talking about the glow where there's still some of the light coming around the curve of the Earth. So maybe you've got, I don't know, 30 minutes of real dark. And if it takes 15 minutes of perfect dark to get your eyes adjusted, then when is it you're going to actually look out the window at space? Number one, you've got to shut off all the lights inside the spaceship. And that's going to be fairly inconvenient to the other 6 or 5 people there. And you have to be by one of those windows in perfect darkness for at least 15 minutes just to let your eyes get adjusted. And that means that was 15 minutes you didn't do anything useful. So it's really just not worth our time, because you can get great images of space from the surface of the world on a beautiful dark night, or from the telescopes that we've put up. What really requires the nuance of the human eye is looking at the world. So yeah, you can see the sky, and in the darkness there's a bit of a glow, but it's like any beautiful dark night. And outside during a spacewalk, I talked about it in the class, but I went through the northern or the southern lights, and they were rippling around my feet. And the only way that I could see it was because I'd shut off my helmet lights long enough that it allowed my eyes to adapt to the night vision so I could see what the world looked like in the darkness. So yeah, we can, but normally we're busy working, so you can't shut the lights off. It'd be like, you know, if you were at work during the day, whatever you're doing at Canaveral there, and you said to everybody, hey, everybody, I'm going to shut off all the lights in the office for a half hour just so I can get my eyes adjusted because I want to see something out the window. You know, you might not get a unanimous vote that that's what you ought to be doing. And that's sort of how we are on the spaceship. So yeah, we have telescopes and things on the ship that are looking up at space, but most of the human eyes are looking back at home.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
All right, Chris, we do want to respect your time. We actually have 7 other students ready to ask their questions, but if you at any point
let's go on. No, let's continue. It's okay.
All right, great.
I'm enjoying the conversation. So
wonderful. I am too. Next up, we have Travis.
Hey, Chris, how you doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Travis. It looks like you're in a car.
Yeah, I'm parked. I'm okay. So I'm not driving or anything. Good. So yeah. So I'm calling from Washington, D.C. So my question is sort of an aerospace engineering one. Basically, I want to know how viable are reusable rockets if they're flown multiple times, like a commercial airliner, if they have to leave the Earth's atmosphere, they're traveling several times the speed of sound, burning, excruciating a ton of fuel. And basically, like, how are companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin sort of tackling this engineering hurdle right now?
Yeah, it's a good question, Travis. And I was a test pilot for the Navy just south of where you were. I used to live in Maryland, down with the Chesapeake on one side and Patuxent River, or the Potomac on the other, and nice part of the world you live in.
Thank you very much.
So the vehicle you're sitting in right now, if you think about 100 years ago or even 75 years ago, think about the tires that are underneath your, was it an SUV or a truck or something? Think about
Jeep Wrangler.
The tires. Jeep Wrangler, great. If you think about the tires that you have underneath your car are probably good for 50,000 miles. When tires were new, when Henry Ford built the Model T, if you tried to go anywhere, you were going to blow a tire, guaranteed. I mean, you had to have spare tires with you because the technology wasn't very good. And so you had to plan for the fact that you were going to blow tires. Things were going to fail on a regular basis. But our technology's gotten so good that you might be one of the lucky people who has got to this stage of life driving on tires that, going 60 miles an hour and have never even blown a tire. The technology has gotten good enough that an existing threat has been basically taken care of. Same thing with airliners. Airplanes used to crash all the time. When I started flying in the 70s, we were just coming out of the era where fighter airplanes, which I flew, they crashed all the time. It was just part of the deal. You'd have a crash a month on your squadron. That's just the way it went. It's crazy. But we really improved the technology. And now that horrible incident that Southwest had recently where an engine came apart and knocked a hole and killed a poor lady who was sitting there, that's an awful event. But that was the first major airline fatality in the United States since 2009. That's incredibly safe. I mean, you couldn't say the same for crossing the street. So we have taken something that is inherently dangerous and learned from our mistakes, just like in car tires and in fighter airplanes and in commercial airliners, and gotten to a level of safety now that you hardly even have to think about it. And rocket ships and spaceships are no different. They're just a new problem to solve. We used to think we could never do it, and so we didn't even try. But the folks at SpaceX, under Elon's vision and then his tenacity, have already proven that you can do it. I mean, the space shuttle had reusable solid rockets, but they weren't really reusable like we think about it. You know, they were sort of refurbishable. But I mean, this new Block 5 of the Falcon, you basically bring it in and stand it up and fill it up and use it again. And that is already proving itself. He's had multiple flights. His Falcon Heavy had 3 used rockets underneath. Used rockets used to be an oxymoron, you know, but now it's a thing that exists. So, but there are still going to be more of them that blow up. We don't know everything. We're somewhere between the Model T and the Jeep Wrangler. You know, we're not there yet, but we'll get there. We'll get there. But you have to allow yourself to do everything you can to get it right, but then be recognizing that sometimes you're still going to get it wrong, and hopefully allow a system where the crew won't get killed, where the driver of the Jeep won't die just because something failed. And so you want to build in enough safety systems so that it doesn't have to be fatal even when something goes wrong. And that's why he lands them out on barges. He doesn't always try and bring them back and land, you know, right next to where people are. So it's always going to be difficult, but think about the 100 years of engineering exquisiteness that went into that vehicle that's around you right now, that you can now just sort of take for granted. Space flight's younger than I am. When I was born, no one had ever flown in space. And now, you know, 6 people are living on the space station, and 2 guys, friends, did spacewalks yesterday. A good friend of mine that I water ski with, he's commanding the spaceship right now. We all sort of take that for granted. And it's good because the safety level is high enough. So yeah, they're tackling it really seriously. They're willing to fail, but they're really willing to learn from their failures. And to me, that's why we're succeeding with reusable rockets.
All right. Awesome, man. Thank you very much. And I really loved your cameo with the Trailer Park Boys, man. I love those guys. So it was so fun seeing you hang out with those guys. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. They're nice. They're nice guys to know, not just on camera, but behind the camera. They're smart, capable guys. I was pleased to be able to get to know them. Thanks. Nice to talk to you, Travis.
That's good to know, man. That's good to know. Thank you.
See ya. Bye-bye.
See ya.
And next up, we have Gary.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Gary. How are you this evening?
Excellent. Thank you. My name is Gary Parker. I'm from Milton, Ontario. And my question is, hometown. When you first entered the orbit, when you very first entered into orbit or the ISS, was there anything part of your training that was different from your real life experience? In other words, was there anything that may have taken you by surprise?
Yes, there are varying levels of surprise. You know, there's like, huh, and there's also, holy cow, you know, those are both surprise. But what you're hoping is you're not going to get a holy cow, but you're going to oh, that's different than I expected. It smelled better than I thought it would. You know, the space station is a big closed place with 6 people in it for years and years with no laundry facilities. You'd think it would stink, but it doesn't. The space station, I never once in 6 months on the space station smelled another person. Like I can't go through a day here on Earth without smelling someone else. So it's got a really good air filtering system. The 3-dimensionality of it is a surprise. There's no way to properly simulate coming into a room and have everybody standing on the wall. It's hard to get that in your head. And you can sort of simulate it underwater, but it's not the same. It's weird to come around the corner and you have to learn to have an entirely different reference system. That's new. Weightlessness, being able to move gracefully in weightlessness, there's no way to prepare for that on Earth. You are going to be Bambi on ice when you get to a space station. You're banging into stuff. And I remember on my second flight, when we docked with the space station and we opened up the hatch and we came blundering in from the little shuttle to this big space station, you could just see the station crew just wincing as we were bouncing off the walls and kicking experiments. And, you know, we were just like the worst weekend visitors at your cottage, you know? Right. So, but after a while, you become quite graceful and attuned. So that was a surprise. And we just don't have a good enough simulator. You can get in the back of an airplane that simulates weightlessness for 30 seconds, but you can't, if you're a figure skater, you need to spend hours and hours on ice learning how to be graceful, or a gymnast or whatever. And little 20, 30-second blips of it are never going to teach you the grace that you'll get when you actually live there. But nothing else really surprised me. It was maybe the combination was different, but it was within the scope of what I prepared for. And to me, that was the objective. I want this place to feel different but familiar, so that when I get into it, it's like if you go stay at a common hotel, you know what hotel rooms are like, and you come into a new hotel room and you go, yeah, this is different, but I know what everything in this room does, and it's new, but it's not a surprise. It's there's a little bit of a surprise maybe, but it's not a holy cow surprise. And you want the space station to feel that way, and the only way to get there is to study and train and practice, so that when you get there, you're ready to work and you're not just dealing with the shock and the surprise of the difference of it.
Great, thank you for your answer, and thank you for all your contributions. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Nice to talk to a fellow Miltonian.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And next up, we're joined by Muaz.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Muaz. Where are you today?
I am in Seattle, Washington as well.
Great. All right. So that's cool stuff you got on the board behind you, Muaz. But what's your question?
So I'm a flight test engineer, and my question is, as someone in their mid-20s and also in a test and evaluation career, I feel as though I'm checking many boxes towards being an astronaut. So for you, what do you think are the most important qualifications and qualities for astronauts about, say, a decade from now? And do these qualifications change if the space industry is doing better or worse? Right. And then a bonus question of what's in an astronaut's toolbox?
Are you working for one of the aerospace companies there in Seattle?
I work for a contractor that does flight tests on large commercial airplanes.
Oh, cool. Good part of the world to be doing that. So I'll answer the second question first. What's in an astronaut's toolbox? Everything I can cram in there. You're normally limited by size or weight, but as a minimum, you need a big slot screwdriver and a set of vice grips and some electrical tape. But if you can put more things in there, take it. If you can get a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife or an electrical tester, whatever else you can cram in. But a lot of the main toolbox you have is the one between your ears, of course, though. So you're doing a lot of the right things that you need to do in order to be trusted to fly a spaceship. If you're a flight test engineer, I mean, we fly spaceships. And there's a lot of similarity between flying a spaceship and flying any other vehicle. And the mentality that allows you to safely fly and flight test a commercial airplane or any other airplane, that same sort of analytical mistrust of the vehicle and a desire to always find the things that it's doing wrong and figure out ways to make it do better. That's the way you fly a spaceship all the time. You never trust it. All you're doing is verifying that it's doing what you expected, and hoping it's going to continue to do that and having a plan for when it doesn't. So I think that part of it is very appropriate. You need as much theoretical education as you can get. You should always be studying, especially now. I mean, you can learn another language off of one of these, or you can be studying anything. All the combined information of humanity is at your fingertips like never before in history. So if you're really serious about doing something in the future that's going to require more skills than you have right now, start gaining those skills. And you need to live a life and have friends and family and entertainment. But think about how you apportion out the time in your life and what's important to you. And don't waste your own time unless that's what your purpose is. If you want to, hey, this weekend, I'm going to do nothing. You should make it a deliberate decision and then do nothing on purpose, you know, but don't just let your life of nothingness go on by if something's important to you. So I would constantly be training, and we have astronauts, I mean, who are PhD medical doctor test pilots, you know, crazy combined skill set. But people who have just relentlessly, constantly been dissatisfied with their own level of competence and constantly tried to improve who they are. So I would recommend that side of it. And hopefully you're doing that. The more practical experience you can get as a flight test engineer, the better. Flight time, you know, not just the theoretical and ground and laboratory side, but flight time. There's a whole different world between talking about flying and flying. Your mentality has to be different. If this thing is going to try and kill you, if you're doing something new with this machine, then if you're not prepared to get into it, then you've missed a whole bunch of the learning that can come from it. So, and that when we respect that, and Boeing with their astronauts and SpaceX and the other companies, Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, they're going to fly people, and they want the people to be as competent as possible. And so I would continue to work on that side. But as I mentioned earlier, I guess to Samir, never count on it. Or, you know, don't make a measure of your own self-worth to be something that you have no control over. You know, instead, find pleasure in the things that you have control over. And if they lead to something good, then that's great. But don't make that something good be what gives you your own satisfaction and joy in life. I mean, being a flight test engineer is cool. You get to do stuff nobody else does. And whatever other pursuits you're up to. So I would continue to focus on the obvious stuff, always be educated, try and get as much operational experience as you can, and keep an open mind to where new spaceflight opportunities are going to come from. When I was hired as an astronaut, it was inconceivable that we would fly with the Russians. And I ended up flying a Russian spaceship in Russian. And I never would have thought that would have happened. I used to intercept Soviet bombers to defend North America. But things are going to change. So be flexible and be ready to change too. And the thing that you can change the most is yourself. So always be willing to do that. That answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And fly safe.
You too. Thanks.
And next up, we are joined by Duncan.
Hey.
Hey, Duncan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can also see you too.
Great. Where are you today, Duncan?
I am in Vancouver, Washington, which is very close to Portland, so kind of that area.
My son-in-law's parents live in Vancouver, Washington, so maybe they're your neighbors.
Huh.
That's
cool.
Intriguing that you have the periodic table and that classic National Geographic moon poster up behind you. Oh, and is that a mirror ball in the corner? That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. What's your question, Duncan?
My question was, I was wondering what happens to the body in the weightlessness of space, and what medical problems do you encounter? And on top of that, how does one avoid said problems? How does medical equipment work in space? Is it any different than here on Earth? And does medical equipment function on Earth better or in space better?
Yeah, that's a bunch of questions. So let's see. The big difference between you sitting there in Vancouver, Washington, and the 6 people that are up at the space station right now, the big difference is a lack of gravity. The air pressure in the space station is almost exactly the same as the air pressure that's around you. The humidity, it's about the same too. So the big difference, the big physiological difference is there's no gravity. So that changes, that causes medical problems. Number one is your balance system has to readapt. It's almost like you've had a stroke, or you've been riding in a ride that's spinning and you could no longer balance, or you've taken some sort of intoxicant that has messed up your ability to balance. So that changes how you move and how you perceive the world. The interaction between what your body's telling you and what your eyes are seeing suddenly radically shifts when the engines shut off and you're weightless. If you close your eyes, your body tells you that you're falling through an endless blackness. But if you open your eyes, it's just like you sitting in your room. You're surrounded by walls, and your body doesn't know how to reconcile that. How can it reconcile the sensation of falling and a visual discord of being sitting or in a room? And so your body just, it says, boy, what did you just do? You just ate something poisonous. Maybe you ate a mushroom or a root that is messing you up, and it's going to kill you. So throw up right now. And so your body makes you nauseous, and it makes you tired, because it doesn't want you to metabolize whatever that poison was. So you throw up and you go to sleep, because that's your body's best way to protect you. But of course, that's not what made you feel that way. So we have to do something medical. So we take anti-nausea medicine, and it has a little bit of sugar in it. It's like Phenergan and Dexedrine, so that you don't get nauseous and you don't fall asleep. So that's a medical thing. But you ask about how effective is medicine up there. Well, if you're going to be throwing up, then you can't swallow a pill. So you either have to inject yourself or somebody else with an anti-nausea medicine, or you have to take it through some other hole in your body where it can get into your bloodstream. So we actually have a suppository. I don't know if you even know what that is, but you stick it up your bum. But it sounds gross, but it doesn't matter if you're throwing up, that'll work. And it's a quick way to get that stuff into your system so that you'll stop feeling nauseous and stop throwing up. And a lot of our medicine on the space station, you have to think about the delivery method to the body. You don't necessarily have a doctor on your crew. You need to have enough people trained as medical technicians to be able to take care of any normal medical problem. You could break a finger pretty easy up there, catch it as you're floating by and break your finger, or cut yourself, or get an electric shock, or get decompression sickness on a spacewalk. There's a lot of things could go wrong. So we have to have medical training to deal with all those things. And we need to have enough of a pharmacy up there to take care of it as well. So we have a pretty good stocked pharmacy, and we're trained on it. And we have a lot of research material or material that'll tell us how much dosage is and what to do. And then of course, we're in communication with Earth to talk to really trained specialists if we need to. It's not just balance that is changed by weightlessness, though. It's also where the fluid goes in your body. Right now, your heart is a pump there on the left side of your chest, and all it's really doing is like a conveyor belt that is lifting the blood from your feet and getting it up to your head. It's just like this constant recirculation conveyor belt. If you take away gravity, then there's nothing moving the stuff back down the conveyor belt. So your heart and all your systems keep pushing stuff up to Duncan's head, but there's nothing pushing it out of Duncan's head. So your head swells up, you get your sinuses fill up, your tongue swells up, your legs get skinny. And that's kind of a weird feeling as well. You have sort of like a sinus headache for most of the time you're in space. Your eyes feel puffy. Every morning my eyes felt like they were glued shut. And it's just one of the, I don't know, one of the features of being an astronaut. It's just the way it's going to be. And you could, maybe get on a centrifuge and squeeze all the blood down to your feet, but then you would constantly be in flux of weightlessness, non-weightlessness, balance, non-balance. You're better just to adapt the best you can to being up there. And then if there's a serious medical emergency, last part of my answer, we have to figure out a way to deliver the medical care while you're weightless. Like if someone had a big spurting blood wound, you got to seal it. What do you do with the blood squirting all over? Actually, it's kind of nice because the blood doesn't drain away. So if a scab will form maybe a little more easily because the blood stays in place so long as it's not arterial. If someone needs CPR because they've choked or gotten an electric shock, how do you do that tunka, tunka, tunka on their chest if you're weightless also? We have to get ourselves strapped in and we practice, or you got to put your feet on the ceiling and do it. You have to learn how to do those things in weightlessness. But we figured out most. We hire healthy people. We try and stay healthy. We try and keep the space station as a safe environment. And then we pack what we think we will need from a pharmaceutical repository up there. And then we have enough training to take care of each other. And so far, so good.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Nice to chat with you, Duncan.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have Johnny.
Right. Hey, what's going on, Chris? I'm Johnny Wax.
Hey, Johnny. Where are you today?
New York City.
New York. Nice,
Yes,
nice to
sir.
chat with you. Johnny, what's your question, sir?
Well, first, thanks so much for doing the masterclass. It was so educational and it's inspirational at the same time, and very clear that you've always had the right stuff for sure. So
that's nice of you to say. Thanks.
I want to preface this question with saying I'm not looking for a job at NASA. At least for now, I've got my own music marketing company, and I'm just passionate about the future of space exploration. And as someone who has no background in engineering or science, how can I still be a part of the future of space exploration? Because it's obviously all very exciting, but just being a spectator can sometimes feel, for, I guess, a lack of better words, lonely. I don't know if that's the right word, but
right.
You know, that's I guess the gist of the question.
Cool. No, it's a good question, Johnny. So let's see. Number one is I would satisfy my own curiosity. If you're interested in space flight, I mean, you're in New York. I'm sure you've been to the space shuttle that's sitting out there on the aircraft carrier, or at least at that exhibit. But boy, if you could just get on the train and go to DC and go to the space shuttle exhibit that's there. It's terrific. Or go take a trip down to the Kennedy Space Center. Or
I did that for my 30th birthday this year.
Oh, great! So
it was awesome.
Yeah,
it was a great time.
So that side of it.
Yep.
That side of it, make sure that you're answering your own interests.
Sure.
But then, if you don't want to be lonely, then I mean, there's all sorts of space enthusiasts, and so I would look around in New York. I mean, you could go to that shuttle that's sitting there, and you could volunteer. You could be a docent for it. You could teach people about that space shuttle, learn about it. You could. Gosh, you could say, hey, I'm going to put together a class that talks about how a rocket works, or whatever, or what astronauts do in space, or where did the moon come from, or whatever part of space travel that's interesting to you. What's the life cycle of a star? How does fusion work in the middle of the sun? Whatever, something that's interesting to you, and say, hey, I've got this little course, and I'm willing to go teach it at a Boy Scout troop or a Girl Scout troop, or a local school, or any sort of club, or I bet you there's an astronomy club, or dozens of them in New York. Join some of the organizations, the Explorers Club, or some of the things that bring in people that have that background. Look for speakers that are coming. I spoke at the planetarium there on the edge of Central Park, and there's always speakers coming through there. There's all sorts of chat and meetups, and if there isn't one you like, organize one, and find like-minded people. But I think the real satisfaction comes not just in talking about it, but actually sharing the knowledge with someone who didn't used to have it. And to me, that means teaching. It's why I did the masterclass. But I use Skype all the time, and I like talk to a classroom, and in 30 minutes. It takes me 31 minutes, and I get 30 minutes with the classroom, and they ask me questions, and I answer sort of like this, but at a grade school level. And to me, that's a really worthwhile thing to be doing. I've got this passion, I've got some knowledge about it, and the best thing I think I can do then is share it with people. And we're not about to stop being curious and stop exploring the rest of the universe. And so the more people that realize that that's just part of what humans are doing, and therefore nurture their own curiosity, and you could be part of that. So that's what I would recommend, especially with younger folks, because
I probably have to have a kid already.
Well, no, but there's kids spend very little time with their parents. Right. They spend most of their time at school or somewhere else. And one of my friends up in Canada, he was really interested in it, and he just put together a course, and then he made himself available and went and taught it at schools. The teachers aren't expert, they don't have the time, and they're happy to maybe get a guest speaker in to talk about something cool, or the spacewalk that happened yesterday. Maybe I bet you there's a school within walking distance of where you live that would have loved you to come in for 20 minutes and said, "Here's what's happening on today's spacewalk. This is what it's like to be outside on a spacewalk. This is what it feels like. This is how they got ready, and this is what they're going to learn from it." I would get involved with teaching the things that you're passionate about if you got the spare time, especially since you're already involved in things that are making you live. To me, that's where a lot of the gratification comes.
I think that was perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, Johnny. Nice to chat with you.
Thank you. You too.
See ya. Bye-bye.
And then our final live student question is going to be coming from Bruce.
Hi, Chris. I'm Bruce Anderson from Livermore, California, and just a little adjunct. I removed a guidance system from a Hound Dog missile, and it was about 20 inches in diameter, and it had 6 gyroscopes mounted on 3 gimbals, and I need to put a video together on that. That was at a museum.
That Hound Dog missile, there's one of those Hound Dog missiles in the rocket park at the Cape Canaveral Air Station. I think I've had a look at it, but boy, that was an early guidance and control system. Cool. Anyway, so Livermore, nice part of the world. What's your question, sir?
Could you tell us about returning from orbit and returning to the Earth? Did you get an opportunity, or did you arm wrestle or flip for a seat on the upper deck of the shuttle? Any comments on watching the ionization cloud form around the shuttle, or the color change of the atmosphere, or the buffeting of the shuttle or wheels down? And once I got up in the middle of the night to watch an orbiter streak across the sky as it descended from orbit, I remember it well. And then one other little thing was, there was a time I went whitewater rafting, and it took me a couple of days before I could walk down the corridors at work without going into them.
Yeah.
Similar experiences?
So that last thing you talked about, Bruce, your balance system, just like that guidance system in the Hound Dog missile, it's looking at motions and deciding how to change the guidance of the system it's responsible for. And your inner ear and your vision are doing the same thing. And when they start to get adapted to being on the water, same thing getting off a sailing ship, you walk like a sailor for a while. You weave. Your body has to readapt to being back in terra firma, and it's very much the same coming back on a spaceship. When you land, it's proportionate to how long you were at sea, or how long you were in the whitewater raft, or how long you were in space. The longer you were there, the longer it takes to fully readapt back. Your balance system. My third flight, I was up for almost half a year, and it took a couple of weeks before I wasn't wobbling and I would have failed a sobriety test. It takes a while for your body to readapt. And the subtle things in your body, the endocrine system and things, the bone density, they can take months and months and months to fully readapt, even years. And you'll never be exactly who you were, but you'll be at least back to somewhat like the normal you were before. So yeah, you definitely have that feeling. When I landed on my first flight in the space shuttle, we were at Kennedy, and we streaked across the sky where you look up on California there, and I was fine. I'd only been in space for 8 days, so I was fine so long as I kept my eyes open, because I could just focus on what my eyes were telling me. But if I closed my eyes, I fell right over. My inner ear was still all messed up. On my third flight, it took much longer because I'd been away longer. But coming back into the atmosphere, we don't just arm wrestle for it. It's not random. We train for it for years and years and years in advance, as to who's going to sit where and do what through every flight, because it's life or death. And if you sit in the flight deck for launch, then that means you have to constantly train for landing, because all the way through launch, you have aborts that you have to come back and land. So I've spent thousands of hours training to land the space shuttle. And then on my third space flight, I was the pilot of a Soyuz. And so I flew, like, there's the commander is a Russian in the middle. I'm in the left seat, like a pilot, or what NASA would call a pilot, what an airliner would call a co-pilot. But flying that vehicle up and then back through the atmosphere. So the way it feels, initially you're weightless. But when you turn around backwards and fire your engines, so that now your orbit is no longer a circle, but it's an oval or an ellipse, and you start to brush into the upper atmosphere at the low part of your ellipse, now the air is starting to slow you down a tiny bit. So if you let go of your pen, instead of it just floating there in front of you, because the vehicle is starting to slow down, it looks like your pen is falling. It's not really falling. The vehicle is coming back and hitting your pen, because the vehicle is starting to be held up by the air, which is kind of weird. And the more you slow down, the quicker until the pen actually hits the vehicle underneath you. And you feel that inside your body as well. You start to feel yourself settling into your chair. It's still dead silent, because your way of the air is incredibly thin. But every passing second, you get more and more gravity, and the vehicle changes from being a spaceship to being an airplane of some sort. But you're only down in the thick air, the air below 50,000 feet, for the last few minutes. So it's only when you're down there that you start to hear the air around you. Up until then, it's very, very smooth. What you do feel, though, is because if this is your spaceship, because it's coming into the atmosphere and it is slowing down, even though the air is thin, it is causing a deceleration. You're going from 17,500 miles an hour down to 0. And so there's a big deceleration and depending how thick the air is, you get crushed more and more and more into the floor. On the space shuttle, it was only about 2 times the force of gravity. But on the Soyuz, it would be about 4 times the force of gravity. So after being weightless for 6 months, 4 times the force of gravity crushing into your seat, it felt weird. Just trying to lift my arm up, it just felt strange. If you had someone, 4 or 5 people pushing your arm, and then you try and lift your arm, it doesn't work right. All your feedback mechanisms are wrong, and your face is being dragged down, and it's just a strange feeling. And if you close your eyes and tip your head to the side, instead of feeling like you're sitting in the chair, because you're not used to it, it feels like you're accelerating sideways wildly. And if you tip your head back, it feels like you're doing back somersaults. So that's a really weird feeling. The vehicle is coming to pieces around you, on the Soyuz especially, because it's got a shield on the bottom that burns up. So there's flame surrounding your vehicle. Most of the flame is just plasma, which is just, as you probably know, it's just sort of dissociated matter, like the electrons are stripped off, so that it's almost like a neon light around you, but it's orange. But it's also actual flame as things are getting torched off, because it's 3,000 degrees on the outside. So it's this mixture of plasma and flame licking around your ship. And that's a weird thing to see. It's like flying inside a blast furnace. But then finally, when you get down low enough, then you slow down enough that the high peak G is gone. You get back down to just a little more than 1 G. And it's sort of like being in an airplane or a hypersonic heavy blunt glider. But as you get down, then you can start to hear the noise and the wind rush outside, because there are no motors. So now you're like this 400 mile an hour glider. And so you hear this hurricane of wind around your vehicle. And that's the noise you hear, like being inside a bunker with a 300 mile an hour wind outside. You hear that. And then as you come down and touch down on the runway in Florida, or my second one out in California at Edwards, you can hear the wheels on the runway. You can hear the rumble of the vehicle. You can feel the shaking, and then wheels stop, and now you're back on Earth. And you're this clumsy, unadapted, sick, sort of stumbling, big gargantuan, like I don't know, like one of those Japanese horror film monsters, sort of shaking around. You're Godzilla, you know, but you're back on Earth. So even though physically you feel weird, mentally you've won and you're back, and no one can ever take it away from you again. So it's an amazing process. It takes about an hour.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much. One quick plug for NASA. My mom once asked me, what did going to the moon get me? And I said, your pacemaker. And she went, yeah. Good answer.
Good answer. Yeah, more than that. But yeah, I agree. It's sometimes it's not as easy to connect the dots for everybody as it should be. Maybe that's something that Johnny could be doing as well, is helping to connect the dots to people, to show what curiosity and exploration and cooperation can bring us. Anyway, so thanks for your question, Bruce. That was great.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, Chris, if you still have the time, we do have one more bonus question from another student who wasn't able to make it today.
Okay, yeah, fire away and then we'll be done.
Beautiful, excellent. Thank you so much.
My dog and my granddaughter are banging at the door over here, so like we're almost out of time, but go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So Adam would like to know, so of all the time in space, what's your take on UFOs and extraterrestrials? Did you and your team ever have any close encounters?
So no astronaut has ever seen an extraterrestrial. I mean, there's all the people that would love that to be not the case. I mean, we're looking, you know, I'm confident that there's life other places in the universe. It would be arrogant and ignorant to think that of the basically unlimited numbers of stars and planets and unlimited amount of time, to think that we're the only intelligent life. It's just kind of a self-worship thing. But the enormity of the universe and the enormity of time are such that it's very improbable that we will run into other intelligent life. If you look at Earth's history, there is no evidence all of intelligent life before this last little phase of life has been on Earth for 4 billion years. And it took this long to have intelligent life here. So I think life is pretty common, although we have no evidence of that apart from Earth yet. But I think intelligent life may be much more rare than we originally thought. And I think we have a pretty reasonable shot of finding life somewhere else within our solar system. And that's, you know, we're driving around on Mars, we're sending probes further out in Enceladus and Europa and even Titan. There may even have been life on the moon at some point. It's conceivable that if you look at the geologic history of the moon with the amount of water that's under the rock, maybe at the same time that life developed on Earth 4 billion years ago, it was not that different on the moon, and it wasn't that different on Mars, maybe even Venus back then. So we're still looking, but it is nothing like in the movies and on TV and in science fiction. And I mean, there's lots of people, I don't know how they have the time, but they'll watch hours and hours and hours of NASA video, and then they'll see a little flash of something, go, see, that's, no, I mean, we're not stupid up there, and we're not keeping secrets. We're trying to explore the rest of the universe. And we're trying to discover things and let everybody know what we discover. And to think otherwise it makes no sense. And you could be very pragmatic about it. If NASA found life somewhere else, think what that would do for NASA's budget. It would be very advantageous to us, you know? So it's not like we're going to keep it a secret. So we're looking. And there'll be people that say, oh no, but I heard one astronaut say, here's a classic example. One of my friends flew in space, and as they were getting and clumsily floating around when they first got to orbit, one of them, their rear end floated right by one of the cameras, and it was like a super close-up shot of somebody's butt. And they said on the radio, "Oh, look at that UFO going by." And there have been people for years say, "Oh yeah, well see, she said there was a UFO." So and it, like no, you took it out of context, and it was a joke, And anyway, so there will be people that pull things out of context, and anybody can believe whatever they want. You're free to believe whatever you want. It's way easier to believe things than it is to understand them. But if you actually take the effort to go and do the work and understand, we have not seen life anywhere except from Earth, but we are looking. And I hope someday we find evidence. I hope it happens soon, because I'd like to answer the question myself. The odds are we're not alone, but until we find evidence, everybody's just guessing.
Chris, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, your wisdom, and everything. And thank you also to everyone who tuned in for today's office hour session. Chris, again, thank you so much. This was absolutely incredible.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for preparing the question. It turned out to be office hour and a half, which was fun. But nice to chat with everybody. Thanks for all the curiosity. I'm glad you signed up for the masterclass. I hope you. I know Bruce hasn't finished it yet, but I hope you get something worthwhile out of it. And I did it because I thought it might be a useful thing to do. So thanks everybody, and happy learning.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you and Brian as well, Molly. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.